Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Project Uproar. This is Ryan. Igor is not with me today. We decided, based on what's going on with the coronavirus, that I'm going to take on this particular interview I'm going to have today solo. So today we have a very special guest on the podcast. We have Trevor Spencer. So I'm just going to take a moment to introduce Trevor. Trevor is the manager and producer of Marathon Training Academy podcast, one of my favorite podcasts. Along with his wife, Angie, he has interviewed many top people in the running industry. And Trevor has completed, now I don't know if this is up to date, 18 marathons, a 50K, and 21 half marathons. Is that up to date, Trevor?
I think it's technically 17 marathons
Okay.
because the last marathon I did, they closed down the course at I think it was like 38 kilometers, so we couldn't finish. So I'm not going to count that one. So
Okay.
17 technically.
17. Still very impressive. Yes. Awesome. I know myself, I'm fairly new to running. I've only got into running over the past year. So I ran my second ever half marathon, and now I'm training for I was training for a 30K, which is a 30K that happens in Canada. It's called 30K around the Bay. It's actually also older than Boston, which is kind of cool. But that's been canceled. That was at the end of March, and I'm right now training for my first full marathon in June. We'll see if that takes place. I'm still telling myself I'm going to still run it, even if it's solo. So, not as accomplished as yourself, but it's great to have you on. And I just wanted to start to begin. If you could tell me a bit about your relationship with running. So, for example, like when did you first get into becoming a regular runner? How has your running evolved, or has it evolved? And what are some of the events you participated in over the years?
Sure. Well, thank you, Ryan, for having me on the podcast. I used to hate to run, and I think I actually failed seventh grade or eighth grade because I I refused to run the mandatory mile in California where I grew up. I think they had like this mandatory fitness mile every kid had to do to pass PE. So I failed PE because I hated to run. And I never thought I would be doing this for a living. So as an adult, I wasn't that out of shape. I kind of call myself a desk potato. I used to be a pastor, so I would sit a lot and study and get ready for Sundays. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, I like to study, I love to read books, but it kind of led to a sedentary lifestyle. And other than maybe some hiking, some team sports, didn't get much exercise. Now, my wife, Angie, she's been almost a lifelong runner. So she kind of got me inspired and got me into it. But I didn't really start running seriously until I was probably 30 years old, right around the same time that we started our podcast, which is about marathon training. Ironically, I wasn't even that much of a runner when we started our podcast, but it was really tough. And I started out just trying to run for 1 minute without stopping. And I thought that was hard. And then after it got easier, I would do 3 minutes without stopping, and then I'd go 1 mile without stopping. So basically, built up baby steps like that, and now I've done 17 marathons.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what is it like? Is there a particular age with 30? I know Dean Karnazes said he got back into running at 30. Some people look at like 30 as like this point of getting back into shape. Like, do you think 30 is a particular special age that people like to get back into running or start running?
It could be. We actually hear 40 and 50 a lot more because it feels like this. It feels like you're getting older when you hit 50. I guess I haven't been there, not there yet. I'm still 39 at the time of this recording. But we hear from a lot of people who decided, oh, I'm going to run a marathon. I need to start getting in shape. I'm going to celebrate the big 5-0 by running a marathon.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think 40 and 50 is what we see more as a magic number.
interesting. I'm curious to know, why did you start the Marathon Training Academy? And like, what was your initial vision of the academy, and has it changed over time?
Interestingly, the initial vision has not changed. The first episode that we ever published of our podcast, which is now 10 years old, our podcast is, the first episode, we told people, you have what it takes to run a marathon and change your life. And we were working off this thesis that marathon training is so arduous and the distance, 42 kilometers is so far, that it is a life-changing distance to run, that there will be necessary changes in how you view yourself, how you push your body, how you dig deep, how you deal with pain, how you prioritize your time. Like there's so many fringe benefits of training for marathons. So that was our tagline from the beginning, and we really wanted to be able to help people that wanted to get healthier, wanted to bring new definition into their life, wanted to find those massive payoffs that running can bring, just like it had for us. And I wanted to do this full time. I knew that. I've always been interested in entrepreneurship, so my vision was to be able to, do MTA as a full time living, which we've been able to do since 2015.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm curious to know, like, what did you do before the starting your podcast? Like, what profession did you work in?
Um, Mostly in ministry.
Okay, yeah.
Like I said, I was a pastor. I started a church in Missouri, actually, and I've also done some little side things like drive a forklift. So nothing too glamorous.
I'm curious to know, like, when you took on this endeavor to start the podcast, did you face any obstacles early on? And if so, what did you learn from them?
I faced a ton because I wasn't a very tech savvy guy. So there was this huge learning curve to try to figure out how to build a website, and I was broke as all get out. So I bootstrapped everything, learned how to set up my own WordPress site, learn how to record and edit a podcast. We just almost everything we did ourselves, and it was quite a learning curve. And then as far as the physical running part of it, marathons are still hard for me. I guess they always will be. You got to continue to respect the distance. So training for my first marathon was hard because I'm kind of naturally a lazy guy. Like I don't necessarily like to get up and exercise. Like I
Yeah,
have to force myself to do it.
for
I'd
sure.
rather get up and read a book
Yeah,
than go on a run.
yeah, for sure. Has running helped inform, or has running helped provide you with lessons to continue on with the podcast? What kind of life lessons has running provided you over the years?
There's a ton. Yeah, there's a lot of great metaphors that come from it. Um, that's why people talk about, life is a marathon, not a sprint. Some things just take time, and you have to have patience and perseverance, and that's kind of how it is with building a business, with growing a podcast, with anything that one wants to do, getting an education. There's one concept that I like that I've learned since doing this, and it's about the power of the mind. One of my favorite guests we've had on the show in years past is a researcher and doctor from South Africa named Tim Noakes, and he wrote a book called The Lore of Running, which is like a 900-page tome. It's like the runner's Bible, people call it. And he um, maybe popularized, I don't know if he invented, but he popularized this idea of the central governor model of fatigue. Central governor is another name for one's brain. And he says that we give up and we get fatigued and tired when we're exercising, not because of a physiological state in our muscles, like our muscles are done and they burned up all the glycogen, they go in lactic and they just seize up and quit. Because before that happens, before we run to exhaustion, our brain produces the sensation of fatigue to slow us down because our brain is always in survival mode, always trying to preserve resources. Therefore, long before we are done and through and just hit the limit, our brain tells us that we have. So he says fatigue is more of a mental sensation, more of a mind state than it is actually physiological state. So knowing just how powerful the mind is, and he says you can just choose to ignore it. You can be out there running, and at 10 miles, you're like, "Man, I'm tired." Well, are you really? Can you really not go further than that? Or at 20 miles, that's like that distance in a marathon where a lot of people kind of hit the wall, and uh, you think, "Man, I just can't go any further. My legs are dead." How much of that is really in your mind? Dr. Nook says. He says you can just sort of choose to ignore it and tell yourself, "It's all in my brain. It's all in my brain. It's all in my head," and push through. So the study of the mind and just how powerful our mental state over our physical state can be, mind over matter, that's been interesting to me to see in running and in life. So I kind of feel like you, as an individual, whoever's listening to this, you can create the future and the reality that you want to be true. You can imagine it now. You can visualize it, and your brain says, "Okay, that's the future you want. Let's go to work to make it happen." The imagination is that powerful. It can bring into reality what you desire now. Could take years, but don't limit yourself. I mean, right now I'm privileged and just lucky to live the life, being self-employed and having time freedom and financial freedom that I envisioned, that I wanted 10 years ago.
No,
So I think it comes back down to imagination and faith and just taking action.
that's awesome. And I'm curious to know. I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, like the idea of you create your own meaning. Like, what? How would you define happiness or purpose in life?
Well, that's a question. I like it. I think the study of happiness is interesting. Probably the book that I think of first when I think about what makes me happy, and what, as far as what I've read, is there's a book called Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh. He's an entrepreneur. He's the founder of Zappos, this shoe company, online shoe company, which is bought by Amazon. So it's effectively an Amazon company now. But Tony Hsieh, young guy, massively successful, and built his whole company culture around customer experience, delivering happiness. And he says, "Well, what makes us happy?" And he studied a lot of the literature and boiled it down. He says, "We're happy when we feel like we're making progress." And that's one big takeaway. If we don't feel like we're making progress in life or in our health or in business or whatever we go to do, it's just huge feeling of lethargy and discontent can creep in. So for me, it's freedom. Like that's a high value for me. Like I love autonomy. I love freedom of speech. Being an American, of course. Living in the Western democracies, we're big on freedom of speech. I like freedom of time. I like freedom of choice. That's part of the reason why I'm an entrepreneur. But also, I love to see progress. And probably the moments in my life where I've been the lowest is when I just don't feel like any of my effort is paying off and that I'm not making the progress I want to make. I think happiness for me is those two things: freedom and progress.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think running, you could see tangible progress as you train for a run. Like I know myself, sometimes if I had a bad day, I go out later on and I run and I'm able to get a quicker time or able to go a bit further. You feel you accomplished something, even though
Yeah,
maybe personally in your personal life or professional life, it wasn't that much of a good day or didn't make any gains. So definitely running has those benefits as well. I'm curious,
for
you
sure.
talked about a particular guest you had on your podcast. Um, what, who are some memorable guests you've had on the podcast? If you could name maybe a couple, and what's besides the person you talked about, what's some advice that you've taken away from them?
Yeah, good question. Man, we've had like over 150 guests, I think, and a lot of people that are famous in the running world, like Olympians, like Meb Keflezighi, who won the Boston Marathon and the New York City Marathon. Ryan Hall, fastest American distance runner. Since you're Canadian, we've had I think a couple Canadians. We've had Ed Whitlock, who held the record for the fastest marathon over the age of 80. He was running like sub 3 hour marathons or something at that age, 70, 80. Unfortunately, he's deceased now. Um, but yeah, I think some of the interesting stories that our guests have shared. Ultra runners are a special group of people to study. You had Dean Karnazes on your show. You mentioned there's an ultra runner, an older guy named Marshall Ulrich. He's from um, he's from Colorado, and he's been on the ultra scene for a long time. So I guess for those that don't follow running, ultra marathons anything longer than a marathon. So these guys are out there running, and girls are out there running like 50 miles, 100 miles. And some of these races are over 100 miles and maybe multi-day. So there's this just wickedly hard race in uh, California. I don't guess it's in Nevada called the Badwater 135, where they're running through Death Valley during the hottest time of the year, and it's like 130 degrees Fahrenheit down there. So he goes and he does that like twice, or like back to back, just start to finish, finish to start. Like does it twice, and then one time he did it 4 times in a row. I mean, the guy is just a beast. And he decided at the age of 50 something, he was going to run across the U.S. and try to set the record for a runner over 40, a Masters runner, fastest crossing from California to New York. And he does it. And he wrote a book about it called Running on Empty. And I think he'd gotten from California to about Nevada, one state over. And he had a foot that was just giving him terrible pain. Maybe it's like plantar fasciitis or something like that. Just normally, like a guy like me or a guy like you, we would just stop. That'd be the smart thing to do. We would stop running, we would heal it, we would rest, we would recover. But he had this record he wanted to beat, and he had to go like 70 miles a day. So to complete this, so he sees a doctor in Nevada, and the doctor says, "You need to rest." And he says to the doctor, "What if I did only 50 miles a day instead of 70?" And the doctor looks at him like, "Who is this guy?" Like that's his version of rest.
Yeah.
But at one point, he decides that this record, getting to the getting to New York, is more important than how his foot feels, and that he's just going to choose to ignore the pain, and he's going to talk to it. He told him his foot. He's like, "Hey, we are choosing to run to New York. You can agree or disagree, but we're going to go. And if you want to cooperate and get with the program, then we will welcome you back onto the body. But if not, you can just stay down there and complain the whole way. But we're still going." And like he was just speaking to his foot, just choosing to ignore the pain and just talk about the power of the mind and compartmentalizing something like that. And sure enough, he did it. And sure enough, after a while, his foot sort of, it worked out. It wasn't perfect, but it started doing better. And he called it disowning his foot. He just disowned it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I think Dean Karnazes writes about that, or sorry, it's not Dean Karnazes. It's have you read the book "The Things I Think About When I Think About Running," or "The Things I Talk About When I Talk About Running"?
Yeah, by the Japanese author.
Yes.
I don't think I've read that one yet.
Yeah,
It's a classic, though. I should.
it is. Yeah, and he talks in that book. He ran an ultra marathon, and he basically got to a point where his body hurt so much he had to pretend he was a robot or not human, and therefore he can't experience pain. So he had to psychologically convince himself that like the pain he was experiencing, like he wasn't human, so it wasn't making any sort of damage to his body in order to finish the race. So yeah, it's amazing what you have to do with your mind to
Yeah.
trick it, but it goes to show that power of mind over body, how we can accomplish a lot more than we think.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I'm curious, going back to the podcast, what do you like about the podcast medium? And has your podcasting format changed over the years?
The format has stayed pretty consistent. We always wanted to have a very prescriptive podcast. We wanted to give people actionable content and pretty much get right down to it. And we still try to do that. We do tell stories and share our experiences, but we always want to have some kind of takeaway for the listener that they can get. I think we've gotten a lot better and have a lot more to say now than we did when we started 10 years ago. And what was the other part of your question?
Um, just why do you like the podcasting medium?
Oh yes, podcasting just really suits my nature because um, we can kind of do it from anywhere. We podcasted from our camper, traveling across Canada or the U.S. I've overseas, at home in my basement where I am now, just anywhere. So this flexibility is awesome, and to connect with people from all over the world who listen to the show, people like yourself, it's just such a great experience. That's probably the most rewarding part. Is almost from the beginning we started to hear from people, listen to the show, and um, found value in it. So this community has grown. That
Yeah.
podcasting is just a really, I've heard it said, it's a really intimate medium. People are right there in your headphones, in your earbuds, um, like friends talking to you. And when I meet listeners, people that I've never met before, they introduce themselves and they always say, "I feel like I know you so well, but you don't know who I am." They feel like they know me so well because they've been listening to us for years.
Yeah.
So it's just a really personable medium.
Yeah, and it's very accessible. You could go anywhere and listen to a podcast. You can multitask for sure. That's I think a big draw for me. I'm curious. Like I'm in my 20s, and it's I think very trendy for. I have friends, people in their 20s, who say, "Oh, I want to start a podcast. I love sports, or I love this," but they never get to it, or maybe they'll try to make one episode and just stop. What advice
Yeah.
do you have for new podcasters trying to continue to make a go of it?
Start by asking yourself why you want to start a podcast and who is it going to be for. So think about the audience first. And when I started our podcast, I did a keyword search. I went to the Google Keywords tool. I think it's called AdWords, keyword picker. And I just wanted to see how many people are searching about marathon training because that gives me an indication of how big the market is, how big the potential audience can be. So that's probably the best thing is to decide who you're going to try to reach with it and does an audience exist for that. And then be ready to be in for the long haul if you're going to make the show successful and publish consistently. It could be just once a month or it could be once a week, but consistent format, consistent content, consistent energy on the podcast, of course, is going to make it successful, and people will learn to rely on it. And probably going back to the keyword research, um, since our show is going to be about marathon training, I decided I'm just going to put that into the title of the show. So that really helped us rank on iTunes, which is just basically this huge, powerful podcast search engine.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, some interesting practical tips there. We like to ask this question to all our guests. What advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
Don't be a little bitch. What would I tell my little five? By the time I was 25, I was already starting to read self improvement and business books, trying to reorient my thinking. Because before that, I was just really into theology and philosophy, and I was just reading all that stuff, and it wasn't too much in the business realm. So I don't really know. I try not to live in regret. Like or regret decisions, any decisions my 25-year-old self made. Thankfully, I didn't make any terrible decisions back then. Probably the best decision I ever made, Ryan, was marrying the woman I married, my wife. I mean, if you marry the right person, uh, that will just be the best decision that you can ever make. It'll pay off. It'll be rewarding.
I'm curious to know what's it like working on the academy with your wife, like, and what is your kind of daily schedule every day in terms
Yeah.
of preparing for the preparing for the academy, and keeping your business going.
I really love it. I mean, I love working with her. It's not like we're sitting side by side, like
Yeah.
in the next cubicle over.
Yeah.
Um, we have our own sort of space in the house,
Yeah.
but she has strengths that I don't have, and vice versa. So she's the main content creator. She's a running coach. She's a registered nurse. She's done over 62 marathons at the time of this recording, and so she is really good with community building, with helping runners with the coaching part, with the content creation for the podcast. But she is not a business-minded person. She's not technical. So all of that stuff, like the website stuff and the actual podcast editing and producing, and a lot of the just customer service and business side, like wants nothing to do with. So I take care of that. So it's really complementary strengths, and our personalities are pretty different. Like she's very type A when it comes to her fitness and her training. Never misses a run. And I'm, like I mentioned before, I'm just kind of a lazy guy, and I do like the minimum amount.
Yeah.
So
What's
it kind of makes for interesting dynamic on
yeah.
the podcast.
What's your like daily schedule? Do you have a morning routine, for example? How do you go about your day on a regular work day?
Okay, you asked. I'll tell you. I usually don't get up till like 9,
Okay.
and I go to bed at 1 in the
Yeah.
morning, or 2 sometimes.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I don't think anybody should copy what I do. So I'll get up around 9, sometimes 9:30. Go downstairs, drink my coffee, and I'll read for maybe the first hour of the day. I try to read the Bible every day. I've been reading it in German since I'm learning German, and it's that's the book I've read the most. So it
Yeah.
really reinforces. I can sort of back translate parts that I don't understand in the German,
Yeah.
and then I'll read. I like reading history. I just finished this huge book about Jerusalem because I was planning on going to the Jerusalem Marathon. So I like to read ahead of wherever I'm going to visit. But I've always got I'm a little bit ADD, so I always got about 10 books started,
Yeah.
various genres. But I don't read much fiction, actually. It's mainly nonfiction. And then, yeah, around 11 o'clock, I'll come downstairs, come out of my office. I'll check email. I'll return email, do some customer service, start cracking on whatever I got to do that day. Maybe it's like usually one big task. Maybe I've got to edit a podcast episode, get that out, or record a podcast episode. So Angie will come down and we'll record something. We have a little basement studio, which I'm in now, which is also my office. So I'll work on that stuff till around 1, 2 o'clock. Then I'll go eat lunch, and sometimes I'll just skip breakfast. Sometimes I'll have eaten breakfast already, and then my kids get home from school around 3:15 and 3:45. I got 3 sons, 3 boys, and in the afternoons, sometimes I gotta be like dad's taxi service. I'm taking kids everywhere, to all their activities. And then in the evening, we eat dinner together as a family around 5:30 or 6. And then kids get in bed around 8 or 9, depending on which kid and how old. And then I'll come back down and work a couple more hours because I can get like a second wind around 9 o'clock. So I'll work from 9 till around 11 o'clock, and then I'll go up, maybe watch a little TV for a while, read, or talk to friends, on the internet. Um, well, I a lot of great craft breweries around here, so I'll go out with my brother-in-law who also loves craft beer. And you know what I'm doing lately? Like this is like I said, people might not want to emulate this, but my brother-in-law and I have been going to a hookah lounge,
Okay.
which is a lot of fun. And I feel like smoking a hookah is a lot cleaner smoke than like a cigar or a cigarette, or it's pretty fun. It's like a cultural experience too.
Yeah.
So we do that maybe once every couple weeks or something.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah, you have like a little bit of meditative part of your day. You have your reading. You have
Yeah,
your work part. You have your community parts, family parts. I think you hit all
I,
the important parts for your day.
I didn't even mention exercise. I do that usually not until like 3 o'clock.
Okay.
So I'll hit the weights, or I'll do a run right now. Because it's winter time, I'll run on the treadmill.
Yeah.
and we just got an infrared sauna, so I'll sit in that for about 45 minutes sometimes in the evening.
Yeah. Cool. You mentioned reading, your love of reading, especially nonfiction. I'm curious, what books have made the biggest impact on your life?
Oh man, yeah, I love talking about books. Well, first of all, I would have to say the Bible. I was in a really dark place in my life as a teenager. I was on drugs and got kicked out of school, and someone gave me a Bible, and it just literally changed my life. Like I wouldn't be here talking to you with a wife and 3 kids were not for that book. So I'd have to say that one changed my life. As far as other self improvement books, like I like to read nonfiction primarily. Someone gave us the Dave Ramsey Total Money Makeover when I was in my early 20s, and that really helped me get on a budget. And I was back in those days. I was living below the poverty line. I was a pastor. I was working for a nonprofit, and so we didn't have much money at all. We couldn't afford to go anywhere. We couldn't afford to go out to eat. But once we got on a budget and started giving every dollar a name, like Dave Ramsey says, and designating, how much we're going to spend on this and this and this category, we really saw that we had more money than we thought. And that was then that I started saving. That's another thing that I would tell, 20 someone in their early 20s is start systematically saving. That no matter how much you make right now, you can start saving. And then as far as life changing, I would have to say Rich Dad Poor Dad. So many people say that book, but it's true for me. I read that probably when I was 22 or 23, and it opened my mind to financial freedom, to entrepreneurship. And then I followed up that one with his other book, Cash Flow Quadrant. Cash Flow Quadrant is probably even better than Rich Dad Poor Dad. Like Rich Dad Poor Dad is sort of this parable,
Yeah.
but Cash Flow Quadrant really breaks down the 4 different ways to earn money. You can earn as an employee, where you're trading your time for money, dollars for hours, or hours for dollars, or self-employed, where you're not working for somebody else. You're choosing how much hours you want to put in, but you're still kind of limited for trading hours for dollars. Because if you don't, if you're self-employed and if you don't work, you don't make anything.
Yeah.
Or the third quadrant is a B, business owner. That's when you own the system that other people work in. So you're trading other people's hours for dollars. And then the fourth quadrant is the I, investor. This is where he says everyone should try to be, and I haven't made it in this quadrant, but that's when you're trading your money for more money. So you're instead of trading hours or other people's hours, now you're trading money for more money. You're just investing. And the cash flow quadrant, there's so many. I mean, you don't learn that in public school. At least I didn't. You sort of are. His whole contention is that our educational system, at least here in the U.S., is that we are trained to be like almost you know uh, in the E quadrant exclusively employees, and that's
Yeah.
it. We're not trained to be self-employed. We're not trained to be business owners. We're not trained to be investors. You have to learn this on your own, unfortunately. So that was an eye-opening book, Cash Flow Quadrant. What else? Tim Ferriss, 4 Hour Work Week.
Yeah.
That was a great one. Probably more will come to me later.
Yeah. No problem. Yeah. Yeah. I know I'm a teacher myself, and I know firsthand experience that when I talk to other teachers, especially ones who are maybe about 20, 30 years older than myself, and I talk about like employability options in the future, and I mentioned like entrepreneurship, they're just kind of blown away. They haven't really been exposed to it. And
Hmm.
when you talk about like passive income, like they don't even know what that term means. So yeah, it's amazing how a lot of kids kind of have to get out of the schooling system, and through podcasts, through YouTube, they're able to experience different pathways into the future. But yeah, I agree with you. It's not really taught in schools that you can be creative in your career, and go to, like, you don't have to take the traditional go to college, go to university, and get a
Yeah.
40 hour a week job for sure.
I feel
Um,
like you have to be kind of hungry to go learn that stuff.
yeah,
I don't know if we did teach it to kids just mandatorily,
yeah,
how much of it they would actually absorb and use. Like my kids right now, they're not interested in any of that stuff
yeah,
because they live a comfortable life. You know, mom and dad provide everything they need.
yeah,
But when I started learning it, I was, an adult, had a kid on the way, and was broke and desperate. Like, man, I gotta hustle. Like, I've got no
yeah,
retirement savings started. I can't afford to go anywhere. So I was really under the power of hustle. There's a book I haven't read it yet, but it's by Damon John, one of the Shark Tank guys, called "The Power of Broke." That when your back is up against the wall like that,
yeah.
that's when you really marshal your resourcefulness.
Hmm.
But when you're kind of comfortable, when you start kind of relaxing, you lose your grind, you lose your hustle, and because it's kind of more easier to maintain
Yeah,
what you've got than
yeah,
to go hustle to get more.
yeah. No, yeah, I for sure agree with that idea of desperation. I'm curious to know, going back to running, now that sort of racing events have been canceled, or at least like, do you know any racing events that are still taking place? From what I
Man,
understand, I'm thinking like,
I would. There's this really eccentric run called the Berkeley Marathons. It's in Tennessee, and those dudes, those guys and girls that go down there to run that, they kind of have to get selected to go, and it's the hardest ultra marathon on earth,
okay, yeah,
and only 19 people have ever finished it.
well,
Actually, there's a guy that won it twice. He's a Canadian runner. I think his name is Gary Robbins. He didn't finish even last year or the year before, I don't think, but he's won it a couple times. But only 19 people in history, and the race is so brutal, and it's happening this month at the
okay,
end of March,
yeah,
and the race is so brutal that you just gotta. I think they're going to continue it. I mean, it'd be hard to believe that they would close down the Barkley Marathon
yeah,
since it's known for its brutality anyway.
yeah. Is that because they like not a big crowd that comes out to it, or like only 19? Why is it? Why do you think
Because I should have said. Well, basically, you have to complete 5 loops of I think each loop is like 25 miles,
yeah,
and you have 60 hours to finish, and it's through the most gnarly, like thick woods that you'd ever seen,
yeah,
with constant elevation changes and just in the middle of Tennessee, in the middle of nowhere. The race was inspired by when the guy that shot Martin Luther King, um, forget the guy's name now, but the guy that assassinated Dr. King was sent to this prison
yeah,
in this area, and he escaped.
mhm,
And in like 24 hours, he only made it a couple miles. That's how thick
yeah,
this woods is. So the race director heard that story and he's like, I could have made it
yeah,
a lot further than that. So he decided to start a race in that area to see just how tough people are, and you have to navigate too. You have to do orienteering. So it's not like a course that's well marked. You have to sort of go through the woods and find checkpoints and stuff.
yeah,
So because it's so brutal, even though I think 30 or 40 or so people start every year,
yeah.
most years no one finishes under the time cutoff.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't know if I'll be able to strive for that yet, but for sure that's a crazy experience. So now that I'll say a lot of events have been canceled. I know you're a podcast that tries to get people pumped up and try to get committed to running a marathon. How could runners stay motivated every day to continue with their training or continue to find that why in running when they don't really have that event to work towards right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are actually just about to publish a podcast episode today about that topic. You have
Yeah,
to ask yourself, would you continue to run if there were no races to do? Is running just have the intrinsic value to you
yeah,
to do it? And I think most runners would say, yeah. just how good I feel after I run, physically and mentally, in so many ways that we would continue to do it. Um, I think the landscape sure does look different without races. I mean, I love to go and do races. I was supposed to go run the Jerusalem Marathon. I would have been doing it this Saturday, in fact, but or this Friday. But it's hard. It's discouraging because people have been training up. A lot of people listen to us. They were on track to go run Boston, which would have been first part of April. They would have, or the London Marathon, which is just after that. Big Sur Marathon in California was canceled. Just every race that I know of has been canceled. Now, the next race I have on my calendar is the Pittsburgh Half Marathon, and my wife's gonna do the full. That's the beginning of May, so that's looking uncertain.
Yeah.
I think that we'll get through it, and running's always going to be there for us. And even if we can't race, just all of the benefits and payoffs that we get from running um, still exist. And this might be the only way to keep our sanity. Here in Pennsylvania, where I live, the governor just announced today that all non-essential businesses have to be closed
Yeah.
for this quarantine. So what else is there for people to do? I think running is going to be like a pillar of our day now when we get through this. And we are, if people are interested in doing a virtual race, since their race got canceled, we are hosting one. And that's also what we're going to talk about on this episode we're about to release. And we're going to call it the Social Distancing Run.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And it's any distance between 5K to marathon or ultra marathon, just whatever distance you want to go.
Yeah.
Whatever race perhaps you were signed up for that got canceled, you can run in honor of that race. And we're getting a medal designed, so we'll actually have a finisher's medal that we can send to all the participants.
Yeah.
And we'll have a virtual group. So I know that there's virtual races going on, like ours, and even some marathons that had to cancel, like the New York City Half Marathon, and others. They're actually doing a virtual option, so you can still run it, just run it at home, and then they send you the swag that you would have gotten normally. So,
Wow. No, yeah, you have to
well,
be creative. That's cool. Definitely, when you have that out, I'll definitely put that in the episode notes for those who are interested to sign up for the virtual race.
cool.
Kind of last question. What's ahead in terms of the Marathon Training Academy? Like, what are you looking forward to? Do you have any new plans? What are you looking forward to when it comes to looking ahead to the podcast?
Hmm. What I really like to do is to continue to bring in more international voices. Like we have runners that listen to us from all over the world, and people like in Australia. We have a lot of listeners in Australia, yet we haven't gone there yet to run any races. And I would love to go over there and do a marathon or two. There's a couple that I'm looking at, and then just interview our listeners, interview athletes from over there, and just continue to bring in voices from all over the world. We do get a lot of American runners because those are the easiest, I guess, for us to get.
Yep.
But I would love to keep bringing on guests and just everyday runners. They don't have to be Olympic level athletes or elite runners. We also like to have just everyday runners who are just getting it done. Other international voices, and keep growing the podcast. We just passed 8.8 million total downloads
Wow. Congrats.
since we started. So I think we're just getting going. I mean, I think our best days are still ahead. We've got now 11 coaches on the team for coaching runners. Started out with just one, my wife, and now we just continue to add coaches as the client demand has been there. So I think we can keep growing that. It's a scalable thing for us. We've got our basic academy where people can just maybe they don't want to be paired up with a coach, but they just want to join in our group and train with us and go through our stuff. That's also scalable. So we want to keep helping runners that way. And I think soon, Angie and I would like to do a book. We haven't talked about it much, but getting a book out there. and getting that in people's hands. And I would just love to see. I've read so many books in my life.
Yeah.
I've always thought about writing one, but I would love to see us do a book that could help runners
Yeah.
and connect back to the podcast somehow.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and I totally see that in the cards, especially like you're both very curious about reading. You already have kind of an audience there already who would, I'm sure, purchase the book. So hopefully, when that
Yeah,
happens, we can have you back on and we can talk about the book.
I would love that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Trevor, for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it. We're big fans of your podcast, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to reconnect in the future.
Perfect. All right. Stay healthy. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Ryan.